The line between a working ranch and a dead one is sometimes just a signature, an accusation, or it could be a government agency that simply forgets who actually stewards the land. And what's happening right now to the King Ranch in Grant County, Washington, isn't just a story, it's a warning flare. And this is not the affluent King Ranch from Texas that many people hear about. This is a small family legacy ranch in the state of Washington being persecuted. Folks, today's episode is a little bit different because the latest filings in the King Ranch case, just filed days ago, blow the lid off this whole thing. The filings expose what's at stake for every rancher, every farmer, every rural American in this country. This isn't about one pond, one permit, or one grazing lease anymore. This is about whether government agencies can rewrite the rules, rewrite their lease agreements, and shut down family ranches after 70 years, more than 70 years, on claims that they have made, and then gag the rancher from being able to defend themselves, that according to these filings and the new evidence that's come out, are absolutely baseless. This week, the Kings took a risk and filed a major motion in court. Their filings are asking the court to lift an injunction that has prevented them not only from grazing their state leases, their state lease land, but also from even having access to their fee-based land in the state of Washington, land they rightfully own. A professional archaeological investigation found that no cultural harm has actually ever come from the Kings grazing their land or maintaining their stock ponds. Decades of grazing history with the Department of Natural Resources show that the DNR never once required permits or surveys, but none of this was able to be made public before because the courts had a quote-unquote criminal investigation against the Kings, which prevented them from telling the truth, from speaking up. An intentional criminal investigation put in place to keep them from telling their side of the story. Judges being asked to put injunctions in place and kick the Kings off their ranch had no way of fully knowing the truth. They were intentionally silenced, and now they're able to speak. And they are, quite powerfully, actually. And make no mistake, this isn't just about the Kings fighting for their ranch. This is the Kings fighting for your ranch, your legacy, your lease rights, your water rights, your family's future. Because think about it, if an agency can shut you down after 70 years of operation, if they can accuse you of violating rules that don't even exist, rules that they're currently writing or trying to write, and then shut you down while they have you legally gagged, that's not management. I don't even think it's legal. What it is weaponized bureaucracy. Today, I'm sitting down with the attorneys representing the Kings. These are the people who know exactly what the evidence is that the state does not want you to know. They're the ones who understand what the filings really say and why this case could set a legal precedent that changes the entire West. Guys, if you care about your land, if you care about the right to graze, if you care about the price of beef that you're paying in the grocery store, if you care about maintaining water, maintaining clean water, if you care about small family farms and ranches being able to operate without government overreach, if you care about keeping family ranches and farms instead of wiping them off of the map altogether, then you need to watch this interview. And more importantly, the Kings need your support. You can visit SaveKingRanch.com and find out how. Again, this is not the same King Ranch out of Texas. This is a small family ranch, a family legacy that is fighting for your rights. Whether you're in Washington, whether you're in Wyoming or Texas, anywhere really that cattle still drink from a pond. The Kings fight is your fight. Because as we all know, what happens in Grant County doesn't stay in Grant County. It becomes policy, it becomes precedent, it becomes the future. Unless we stand up now. All right, guys, let's get into it. Here are the attorneys representing the Kings, breaking down the filings, the evidence, the stakes, and a little bit about what happens next.
I'm Tony Meacham. I'm one of the King's attorneys. I represented them for quite a long time. I have what's considered an agriculture practice. I'm a fifth-generation rancher myself with a current ranch and have been representing Kings with this fight since it began.
Jamie Griffo. I'm co-counsel with Tony representing the Kings. We've been on board since 2021. I'm an attorney based out of Friday Harbor, Washington, and I practice mostly land use and real estate, and have had several successful lawsuits against Department of Natural Resources, but have never seen facts quite this bad.
And when did this case actually begin?
December 23rd of 2021. Yeah. It's been going for a while.
So because this has been going on for a while, since 2021, and it's not something that a lot of people have heard about. It's popped up in the news a few times and then it kind of simmers out. But going back to the beginning of this case, the King Ranch is a well-known ranch for their regenerative practices. They always seem to be a pretty responsible ranch. What happened back in 2021 that brought us to where we are today?
So I guess I'll take that one. It seems like, part of what we're going to talk about is speculation, because we really don't have clear, concrete answers from the state. So what we do have is documents that we've been able to substantiate through our public records requests. And what we found through those public records requests is that Jeremy Sykes, one of the Department of Ecology employees, who has identified himself as not someone with the skills to delineate wetlands, but looked at an aerial photograph and determined, based on this aerial photograph, without having boots on the ground, that Kings had done a bulldozing spree, to use his own terms, and destroyed very rare alkali wetlands. And based on that instance of him looking at that aerial photograph, that then prompted DOE, to Department of Ecology, to go to DNR, Department of Natural Resources, and start this and begin the pursuit of Kings and the persecution. And I do use that word, persecution, not prosecution, of our clients, based on this one aerial photograph that someone in an office in Western Washington looked at and made a determination to pursue our clients.
So this
it's worth mentioning too that these alleged wetlands have been stock water ponds on this ranch for over 70 years for sure, probably as long as 200 years. So this land has been used by the King family for over 70 years and by Wade and Teresa for over 40 years. And it's a checkerboard pattern of fee-owned land with leased lands from DNR totaling about 37,000 acres. And they have been leasing this same land from DNR, just Wade and Teresa for 40 years, their family before him 70 years. And, nothing new was happening. There were these stock water ponds that were being maintained. DNR had been out there. DNR had, it really actually praised them for being model tenants and stewards over the years. So this was just out of the blue. Someone at Ecology woke up and said, on the aerial photos, these look like they're regulated wetlands. And to Tony's point, that kicked it off. So,
and I've seen at least one of the aerial photos that they published, and it didn't look like an area that was wetlands to me, just because of how uniform it was. Even before and after, it looked like something that was man-made at some point in time. But what you're saying is this did start from a photo, because that was one of the things that I had read different things about. It started from a photo. It started from a random hiker complaint. But this was something that they looked at a photo and made this determination that these are wetlands.
That's our understanding based on the records we've been able to gather through the public records requests. We've also heard the same thing you have, that it may have been a hiker that tipped Ecology off. And I use tipped very lightly because there's no tipping, right? Like, Department of Natural Resources had been out on this ground. It was their ground, had been out on there for years and years and years. So clearly knew that the only source of water were these man-made stock ponds for not just livestock, but also wildlife.
And I think that's an important point too, is that a lot of people look at these things and they think that that it's only benefiting livestock, but these ponds are also helping with the wildlife populations out there as well. And what ranchers are doing is maintaining that ecosystem in a way that otherwise wouldn't be as habitable as it is today.
Right, and that really goes to the use of the word, right? It's stewardship, not ranchship. We're not talking about ranching just to promote our own our own ranch, it's stewardship because we're about the holistic approach and taking care of everything, not just ourselves.
So, Department of Natural Resources, though, they've been out there a lot. They've seen how this ranch has operated for, um, I think you just said 40 years plus the 70 years before them. So they've seen how this ranch has operated for decades, and they've never raised any concerns about this before.
No, and what's really interesting is that we have state laws on the books that require DNR to engage with their tenants if they have concerns about environmentally sensitive areas. In fact, our state legislature, when they wanted to try to address how should we balance, the productive use of land for things like grazing with ecological protection, well, they passed these statutes that require DNR to engage with their tenants to come up with these plans about how to do the activities in these areas. And what's interesting here was that they actually followed the statute on the King's previous lease. They came up with a resource management plan, no mention of these particular wetlands that they decided to call them now. And sort of through that process, during the next lease period, they abandoned that altogether, mostly because they're like, look, Kings, you guys are doing a great job. You are taking care of this ranch so well. We don't even need to do this, was basically how the last lease ended. So, it's interesting that there's actually a statutory obligation for DNR to work with its tenants to solve these kinds of problems so it doesn't turn into this.
Now, does the Department of Ecology have those same regulations, or is that just with the Department of Natural Resources?
So Department of Ecology. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead.
So ecology has a bit of a different purview. They are operating under the Water Pollution Control Act, so they're trying to balance this idea of protecting water with all sorts of things that happen, including designated and beneficial uses. Now, to be really clear, the Kings have what's referred to as a vested permit-exempt stock water right. So by watering their stock at these stock ponds, as they have for many decades, they have established a senior water right to do this activity. And our legislature has declared that the use of that right, the exercise of that right, to be a designated and beneficial use under state water law. And so what's really interesting is all of ecology's regulatory authority to protect water quality is solely to make sure that those designated and beneficial uses can keep happening. And so we're stuck in this, it's tautological almost, it's circular, right? Because they're saying, hey, we have these Water Pollution Control Act laws to protect the water so that you can use it for stock water, but your stock watering is violating it, so now you have to stop. And that's their lens. There are other things that they're supposed to consider as part of an enforcement action, including whether or not the enforcement action will lead to the conversion of agricultural land to some other use. There's no evidence that they did that in this case.
And I wanted to get into a little bit here in a second, because I want people to understand that a lot of the damage to the King Ranch, their operations has already been done. They went in and they canceled their leases. But kind of backing up when you were talking earlier about the evidence that you've been able to acquire, the Department of Ecology, from my understanding, also recommended this for criminal investigation. And doesn't that in some sort of way prohibit you from getting all the information you need to protect your clients?
Right, and I kind of hit on that earlier when I said the evidence we've acquired through a Public Records Act. So I think what you're really talking about is when we found out that Department of Ecology actually recommended that the Attorney General's office, through their Environmental Protection Division, the EPD, actually pursue the Kings in a super secret proceeding, somewhat similar to what you'd go after like a RICO crime. And they did that through the SIJ proceeding. We've never been able to look at that file. So what happened was the AG's office filed this under seal with the Grant County Court, did not tell Kings. So throughout this entire time, when they're pursuing these criminal charges, they're also at the same time sending Kings a letter saying, Agree that you did this, agree that you took these actions, agree that you'll pay the cost to, put these lands back the way they should have been. Like, this is happening at the same time and we don't know. So we don't get told anything. We found out about the criminal proceeding because the AG's office went to subpoena the king's employee and they actually served his wife instead of him.
Wow.
Because that subpoena had clear instruction that he was not able to talk about it. But she doesn't know. She gets a subpoena. She freaks out like a normal person would and calls. It's like terrible cell service up there, gets a hold of Kings. Everybody, that's how we found out about it. If we had not found out about it that way, I don't know that we'd still know today. And our clients may have done something to their detriment just because at some point you want to stop the bleeding, right? Like, the state has unlimited resources. No rancher I know has that same ability. Like, money going out is money that you are not spending on your ranch, not your, money you're not spending on your operation. So when we found out about the criminal side, that then had to force everyone to stop and hold and figure out what the heck was going on. And to this day, we still don't have the full picture of what that criminal investigation looked like, did, and we don't have the file. We'll never get that.
Is that something that they're still pursuing, or is it something that was just kind of thrown out there? Obviously, it kind of messes with your ability to get all of the information because they could say, well, that's under seal.
Yeah, and they did. And so I would say to you, like, to this day, we don't have anything in writing that they're not pursuing it. So that criminal investigation and that criminal proceeding actually was very in depth. It took us, Jamie, did we spend 5 months fighting it? I don't even know. I don't remember. I mean, forever. We were in court multiple times. Kings had to go get a criminal defense attorney. We were in court multiple times trying to advocate for this employee. He had a really good criminal defense attorney, and he would go in there and be like, look, judge, like, we don't even know what to do in his defense because we don't know what the charges are. And the judge would literally look at EPD and say, can I tell them? And they would say no. And so this went on, like multiple hearings, multiple times of going into Grant County, trying to advocate for this individual as well as the Kings and figure out what this process looked like. Through this process, oh, go ahead, Jamie.
I was just going to say, to put the timing is also suspect, right? Because they bring these criminal charges after some of the civil action have started. And so in Grant County Superior Court at the same time, we had challenged DNR's termination of their grazing lease. And so while this criminal matter is unfolding, the attorneys from the same Attorney General's office are fighting in the Grant County Superior Court to get a preliminary injunction, which is a court order, directing the Kings and their cattle stay off of all the land during the pendency of this action. And we went into court to try and oppose that request, but we had to say, look, we can't put on evidence. We can't make arguments. There's a criminal investigation for potentially felony criminal charges being brought by the Attorney General's office. Yeah, and we begged the judge to not rule in their favor. He decided that based on the evidence that was presented, to grant that injunction, and I think he acknowledged that, this was a bit problematic, that we couldn't put on our case, but we couldn't under the circumstances. And so, it looked to us like the Attorney General's office had coordinated this criminal investigation so that we would have to so we couldn't participate in the opposition to them seeking a court order to kick the Kings off the ranch entirely, which they prevailed upon because we didn't have any evidence in opposition. So it was really unfortunate and started to very much blur some constitutional rights of the Kings.
And so at this point in time, they're off the land. How does that impact their business?
So there's significant impacts that, anytime that somebody's gotten a court order like this. Currently, we're getting ready to pursue that filing, so we can't get really into the details because, that hasn't been litigated yet. But we are going to litigate that very issue. Like any rancher, anytime you're prohibited from using your entire ranch, there are significant impacts, right? You have to make decisions. Like, the plan you had to move your ranch ahead has suddenly been curtailed. And so not to get too far into the weeds, but we're looking at a client that has to put all this money out to defend themselves based on these actions, and then also can't use their own resources to gain the money that they need to fight the state. So it's really been pretty much a twofold action of, we're going after you criminally so you can't talk. We're going to prohibit you from using your ranch in its entirety. Oh, and by the way, we know you don't have the resources we have, so we'll just keep going.
Well,
But I'm
that
saying,
and sorry, Tony.
go.
I was going to say that, what was pretty offensive at the hearing on the motion for that preliminary injunction was we were arguing that this is existential. If the Kings get kept off this land for long enough, they will have to shut down their ranch. They will lose their genetics. They will lose, all of the things that cattle ranchers rely upon to have a successful operation will be out the door. And we were asserting that you can't put money on that. That's not something where you can just cut a check and, oh, the Kings are whole. I mean, this ranch itself is a legacy asset and something that the Kings plan to continue doing for many generations to come. And the Attorney General's office in arguments just kept saying, well, look, if we're wrong, we'll just write a check. And they literally, I forget, Tony, how many times did he argue to the judge, if we're wrong, we'll just cut a check, meaning from all taxpayers in Washington state to just cut a check. Well, it might have been 5, 10, 15 times.
No, it was 11 times. He did it 11 times. I actually went back and counted because it was so frustrating to me and just it's such nonsense. Like, you cannot tell a rancher, we're going to write you a check and that's going to make you whole. If we were about the money, we would not ranch. Like, that's just a fact. And, and Wade and Teresa, it's just not about them. They have their daughter there. They have their grandchild there. This is a generational ranch. Their legacy is more important to them than any cash, any check. And I mean, the AG's office just kept saying it. 11 times is what I counted.
So it seems to me if the issue was just these wetlands, and maybe you can explain what alkali wetlands are, but there was just, what was being done to these wetlands. There's a lot of ways to go in and mitigate that and correct the situation. But it seems from an outsider looking in that all of the actions that they have taken were more so to have the end result of shutting down the legacy ranch.
Yeah,
That's
I'd agree with that.
just from an outsider looking in.
Well, and let's stop and go back a little bit, because I think one of the misnomers on this case is that these are not alkali wetlands, right? And, that was the state's position. These are alkali wetlands. When they told us that they wouldn't share with us any of the evidence that they're alkali wetlands, that forced Kings to the position of getting their own experts. Because the one thing you don't want to do is go into this fight and be like, my word against your word. So the first things Kings did was they located some of the best experts in the entire nation. And those individuals went in, and those experts actually did the testing and looked at the criteria to determine not only are these not wetlands, they're not alkali wetlands. So that's the very first thing that everybody needs to understand. These are man-made stock ponds that do not have the characteristics of wetlands, and they do not have the characteristics of alkali wetlands. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that it's not a he said, she said. We went ahead and got the experts. Everyone agrees that has actually been there. These are not alkali wetlands.
Well, and on that point of alkali wetlands, that phrase or that thing doesn't show up in any state statute. It doesn't show up in any regulation that's been properly adopted by an administrative agency. That this idea of an alkali wetland originated in policy documents that were created by DNR, actually, a division of DNR, working with ecology to identify this unique type of a wetland. And that this kind of gets to one of the bigger issues or themes, I guess, of this case, which is also about, sort of agency abuse and overreach. And, when you don't have clearly defined laws and regulations, it allows these bureaucrats who are not elected to wake up one morning with a whole new idea about how they're going to interpret something, and then make that allegation and force you, the rancher, to prove that they're wrong after and the sad reality is that this is happening throughout our state. And most people don't have the time, the energy, the money to stand up and fight for themselves like the Kings have. And I do genuinely believe that, the Kings are in this for themselves. They have to be, but they're also doing this for everyone out here, because many people will just fold up and walk away. And we are seeing that happening. And I think this maybe is a very long way of answering your initial question, which was, is this really about the wetlands or is it something else? And, my gut at this point, everything seems to be showing that there is some ulterior motive, which might be as simple as the state does not want grazing to happen on this land anymore.
And why do you think that is? Because I've just I cover a lot of different agricultural stories, and Washington has come up a lot in this past year. Just even with their injunctions on 30,000 water users, it doesn't seem like their objective in any of these situations is actually to solve these issues, but rather to either cut off water or eliminate people from being able to use their land for agricultural purposes in general. Do you feel like that's kind of a theme that's been going on in the state, or where do you think it's coming from?
Yeah, I do feel like it's a theme going on in the state. And to get to that, I'm the water and ecology chair for the Washington Cattlemen's Association and deeply involved with the cattle producers of Washington as well. And have been fighting that fight against these state agencies for over 20 years myself. And through those years, we've seen, there's always been a change in the regime, but it seems like they've just doubled down in their efforts to put the screws to agriculture. They specifically like to pick on, in my mind, ranchers because we make ourselves easy targets because we don't want to ask for help. We don't want to, reach out and let people know what's going on. So in my mind, it's about the political ambitions of the people of the state that want to claim that they're the most environmental, the most green state. That's the platform from which they want to launch themselves into the national political level. And we're the target for that. And by we, I'm meaning us in agriculture, we're the target. And in this case, a lot of ranchers, they don't, as Jamie said, have the ability, the money, the time, the energy to stand up for themselves. And a lot of times they're older. We see a lot of our older generations are being the ones that are targeted. A prime example would be one of my grandpa's best friends who's 85. He got a letter from Department of Ecology saying, you have the substantial potential to pollute because your cows have access to this water going through your land. And he just, near tears said, I can't do this anymore. I'm retired. I'm done. Because they can't. And it's tragic.
Well, in
Well,
that vein, we from day one, we were begging these agents. I honestly, when I first got involved with this case, I thought, okay, this must be a misunderstanding, right? And certainly, if we can just get together and talk with them, we can figure this out, right? There is a solution. There has to be a way for ranching and agriculture to coexist with water quality, right? I mean, they are not mutually exclusive, or they don't have to be. And that was particularly true in this case where, I got to know the Kings and see their practices. I'm not a rancher, but I can tell you when I went out there, it is the most beautiful and well-maintained ranch I've ever seen. And, their heart is so into caring for that land, for their future generations. I think it was Wade who at one point said, I'm not going to poison the only water on my land. How are my cattle going to drink? Like, he's going to take better care of it than anyone. Right. And so, I really genuinely believe this was a big misunderstanding. We had been begging for years, Tony, to have a meeting with DNR and ecology to talk about it. No, they would never do it. We could never get them to sit down with us and talk about this, to listen to our legal arguments, to listen to our expert reports, to see if we could work together to find a solution. I mean, maybe there needs to be some kind of rulemaking or some law, right? That more clearly explains how are we going to have ranching and water quality live together. If we need that clarity, let's do that together as a community, not just letting them wake up one morning and deciding that somebody's potentially a felony, should have a felony criminal charge. It's unbelievable.
Well, and
So
sorry, go ahead, Charlie.
I was just going to say, on that note, though, they haven't wanted to sit down and talk with you guys at all. So they really don't care what the specialists have said about them being wetlands or not being wetlands. Have they even tried to prove that case for themselves, or is this just them making that determination?
Yeah. I guess if you sit in Olympia, you just get to look at a computer and make those things up.
I mean, that's the really scary part, is that what the Kings have been through stemmed from, a phone call or some person looking at a computer and a desk. And that's all they had to do in this case to get this, everything you've just heard, off and running. And the people who bear the brunt of that are the accused, right? And so the problem is that even if the Kings prevail in this case, they're never going to get these years back. They're never going to be made whole. They've had to do all sorts of things to try just to stay alive through the fight. And that's a lot of power, right? That if it's not used the right way, is really catastrophic. And that's what's so upsetting about this case, is that it feels like there's other agendas, or the government should be here helping all of us, including cattle ranchers, right? We're all here together. This is our water for everyone. And quite frankly, like, the Kings should be heralded as a model for how you can have ranching and water quality at the same time. And I was hoping I'd get to teach the government, the agencies, that, like, wait, you're missing an opportunity. Like, these are your best partners. This is exactly what ranchers should be doing. And let's educate them. But no, they won't even sit down, because, to your point, I don't think they care. I think that, and I can only speculate on this, but there has to be some kind of policy decision that's been made that, agriculture or cattle ranching, it's a binary choice. You have that, or you have environmental protection and preservation, and we can't have both.
I've visited a lot of my wife and I film documentaries. We visited a lot of state parks, national parks, and private ranches. And some of the private ranches we visited were in better shape than some of the state and federally run properties. Just the entire ecology was held together a little more, because they depend on it to feed their animals. They depend on everything functioning correctly. So I think that even in Washington, you've got to have those animals out there grazing in order for that land to function the way that it's intended. But I think it's a bit ridiculous that they can just create rules around things like, we're going to create this alkali wetland scenario, put it on the rule books, and then have the right to charge somebody for it and ruin their entire life.
They never even put it on the rule book. Sorry, but to interrupt, like, they literally, like, wrote it in a report that they have, and somehow you and everyone else needs to know that that's now a thing that you're being regulated for. Again, it's like, the Supreme Court in Sackett really did touch on this, saying, look, if we don't have laws and regulations that people can understand, how are they supposed to live their lives? I mean, one of the most frustrating parts, like, we have statutes on the books that basically tell these agencies to, like, work with these tenants to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that you have this information. So, not only did they not go through the proper legal channels to create these laws and regulations that we all have to live by, but they won't even, like, work with the ranchers to let them know that here's this other thing that we're thinking about and concerned about. It's just, you wake up one morning, it feels like gotcha,
Well, and I think the other piece of it too, just real quick, in Washington State, 9044-050, it allows us to dig stock ponds without getting a permit. We have that law on the books. And Department of Ecology just wants to ignore it. It's like, oh yeah, we know you have that, but it doesn't suit our agenda, so we're just going to ignore it. So not only did Kings do nothing wrong, they have the right under statute to do the things that they've done, and Department of Ecology just flat ignores it.
So what's it like fighting this thing? Because to me, it's pretty clear that if this isn't even a wetland that is within the law, it's just something they created in a report and decided to enforce. But yet they're able to take this as far as they have without anybody stepping in to stop them. Where's the protection to the people from what seems like a bit of a rogue agency?
It's us. We're it. I mean, I'd like to tell you that, some of the lawmakers, some of the elected officials have, like, taken notice, but I would just say to you, and I would like you to think back to the first time you heard about this case. If someone came to you and said, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Smith is being prosecuted for environmental crimes. The first thing you're going to think is, well, what did Mr. Smith do wrong? And so the way that Department of Ecology put that press release out right away, I mean, they absolutely tried to take control of the narrative from the beginning. And so not only have we had to fight in the law what's going on, but we've also had to fight in the world of public opinion. And so because it's the natural instinct of most people to think that can't happen to me because I didn't do anything wrong. The problem is neither did Kinks. And so you've got this natural idea of, well, that can't be us. But the problem is in this state it can. And so I think one of the biggest parts is that we as attorneys are the only thing that stands between the Kings and at one point jail, literally, and their ability to continue. And you would think in your mind that the public would just rise up and think this is crazy, but they're all afraid. And fellow ranchers also afraid. Ag commodity groups afraid. Because if this can happen to Kings the way we're telling the story, the truth, it can happen to anyone, and that is very scary. So to answer your question, it's been hard, it's been difficult, it's been draining. I think at times I at least feel like an island because, again, I'm also a rancher and also involved in these other groups. And my parents always taught us, like, you can't sit by and let a bully someone because then you're no better than the bully. And so we can't do that. We cannot sit by and let this happen. We have to stand up for what is right, even if we're the only ones doing it. And so we have done that.
With this being a state issue, you mentioned legislators. I know Secretary Rollins has recently taken an interest in this particular case. I guess that it makes your clients feel a little better that, they're not trying to influence the federal government to get involved because the federal government doesn't like what's going on. But what can somebody like Secretary Rollins do to help the Kings in this case, since you're dealing with a state agency?
We've seen Secretary Rollins in the mod case, and then again in that case back in New Jersey, really step in and worry about the lawfare angle. And so we are clearly waiting with the government shutdown. We've had to kind of sit back and wait for her staff and everybody to come back. But we're also waiting to see what that's going to look like. She said help is on the way. It's gave Kings like just this breath of fresh air, renewed energy, because it is a very hard case to continue. And we're really excited, I guess would be a good word, excited, and we're anticipating what that will look like. I really don't have better answers for you because we don't have anything more, but we are very hopeful that she can advocate for Kings in the same way that she has done in the past for other ranchers and help to get this case, and at least ranchers in Washington and agriculture in Washington, some relief from this government.
Well, looking back at the water injunctions, and I had done a story on an 85-year-old hay farmer who got fined over $100,000 for watering 20 acres during the summer months. And this is a guy who clearly is not in a position where he can afford representation and probably doesn't know all of the loopholes that are going on. But it sounds like he's made efforts to try and move water rights around. I guess his dad had the farm before that, and so they've been watering those hayfields for decades. But it seems like, and you just mentioned another 85-year-old, that's some of their actions that are hitting some of these older people are very hard and intentional in a way that they just kind of give up. So do you think that there's some sort of larger civil rights case in there somewhere, since it seems to be targeting specifically, I mean, some of the older people, even in the water injunctions, aren't going to be able to sit down and prove where their water rights came from after decades of assuming they had them.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something for Secretary Rollins to look at. We're kind of tied into the fights that we're fighting, but we do see from the broader picture that there, just from the pattern that you've identified, that we've identified, there does seem to be almost a targeted approach in how things are done. And I think that's worth some of these constitutional lawyers and people of that nature looking at, or some of the government officials. Clearly that can't be our focus just because we're totally swamped with what we're doing right now. But I do think that that's something that's worth looking into. It definitely feels, but the other part of it is, and I think you know this, Charlie, a lot of the ranchers and people now are older because nobody wants to do this work. So you kind of have that dichotomy of, is it because they're older that they're being targeted, or is just everyone in agriculture getting older and they're being targeted? I don't know, but I definitely think it's worth looking into.
Well,
Yeah.
and on the solutions piece, I mean, we do have the courts, and I do trust that, sometimes it takes appeals, but I do think that the courts are there, to keep things like this in check. And I believe that they will do the right thing the right day, if you can survive long enough to get your day in that, final court of appeal. Um, but the other piece here is legislative fixes, right? And I do think that everyone in Washington or every state that you're in, it's hard to be engaged in the rulemaking process. Agencies have gotten very strong over the past many decades. They have been given a lot of authority by the legislature. Agencies are largely unappointed, right, or unelected, right? So there's no real recourse or balance or check. And oftentimes they will go through legal rulemaking, which is a public process and people can participate. But if you don't stand up and participate, they pass whatever regulation they want. And then you have to live by it. And it has the effect of law. And so, one thing I would sort of encourage people to do is get more involved in administrative rulemaking and, try to carve out protections or work towards clarity or consensus, because if we don't have clear laws and regulations that we all have to live by, anyone with any power at any of these agencies can wake up one morning and say, well, here's how I think that should be interpreted. And now you have to spend the next 10 years of your life litigating that in court. We really need more clarity. And I think people need to engage in rulemaking. For example, sorry to be so long-winded, but this is important, which is, yeah, to tie it back to King Ranch. So one of the arguments that ecology first made, it wasn't just that these were alleged wetlands. It was that you did this and you didn't even get a permit from us to do this. And under our state law, if you have a stock water right, it is permit exempt. You don't need a permit to exercise your stock water right. Even more, the Water Pollution Control Act that they've come after the Kings under has a carve out that says you can't use the Water Pollution Control Act to supersede, abrogate, condition, or impair. That's some of the strongest legislative language I've ever. It was literally 4 words to say the same thing, which is the legislature saying, guys, whatever you do, you cannot mess with people's water rights, including their stock water rights. And so one of their arguments was that, Kings, you never got a permit to do what you did. And our argument was, where's the permit? What statute says we need a permit for this? What regulation says we need a permit? And they could never point that to us. So one of our lawsuits that we filed is under the Administrative Procedures Act against the Department of Ecology, because they were saying, here's what they did. They took their internal state, it's called a JARPA form, and they changed it without any rulemaking. This is what the evidence shows so far. Went through no process. They literally have this form. They added a box that if you wanted to do something that could impact what they call waters of the state, like the Kings did, you had to apply for an administrative order through ecology. They made this up. This doesn't exist. And now, guess what? We filed that lawsuit, and now ecology is going through rulemaking to create the permit process that never existed that they say the Kings should have gone through. So, again, long way of saying this is a really important time to get involved, because it's this rulemaking that is going to protect people or has the possibility of protecting people like the Kings, ranchers, ag, developers. Now is the time to stand up and get involved in that, because, Tony can attest, the other day, Ecology did a public meeting session, and on one of their slides they throw up there, they say, don't worry, we're going to have exemptions for existing and ongoing agriculture. Great. We're all like, that's great. That's exactly what you should have. And then you read the bullet points, and it gets to the third bullet point, which says excavation, leveling, and fill activities that alter land contours and impact state waters shall not be considered normal or necessary farm activities. I mean, that's what it says. So if you're a farmer and you need to till your field or do, dig your stock ponds, that's not, we don't think that that's like a farm activity that should be exempt. So you're still going to have to get it. I mean, that exemption means nothing if that bullet point stays in, right? So,
Well, don't they consider rainwater state's water?
Yep.
yes, their current position
So-
is every drop of H2O is regulated by the state definition of waters of the state.
Yep.
So I mean, that's just fascinating to me, though. They're going after the Kings for this, and now they're trying to pass the rule for what they're going after the Kings for.
Yep.
To create the process for the permit that they claimed the Kings never got, because guess what? There was no permit to get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do they actually listen to people when they put the rulemaking out there and you comment? Do you think that they actually listen to those comments, or do you think there has to be something else done with the way that we run our agencies to hold them more accountable? Because I kind of feel like sometimes I've tried to participate in rulemaking, especially when it impacts our farm or things that we're involved with. But I often wonder if it's just, me taking the time to put in comments and nothing happened.
Yeah, no, for sure. They're at least forced to acknowledge your comments. And if they ignore the comments and don't take those comments into consideration, it does give you a better platform from which to challenge that rulemaking, like through lawsuits and such. So we do encourage people to comment, pay attention, be part of that process, because it does make things easier in the long run if that law is or if that rule is passed in a way that's very detrimental to agriculture or whatever, whatever you're involved with.
And pressuring elected officials to pass statutes. I mean, I do think part of the problem is we do need to rein in some of the authority that the agencies have, or be more clear about what the expectations are when it comes to how they're going to implement. And the only ones who can fix that are state legislatures. And so, I really think that. Personally, I think that like being able to produce food in Washington state or even the country, like I think that's a national security issue. I think that, we really do need to be able to make our own food if and when that time comes. And, I think regulating it out of existence is dangerous for a million reasons. And, I hope agriculture is so deep for all of us and so inherent in everything. And honestly, it feels like probably most of these laws came out of wanting to protect agriculture because of how important it is, right? And so I wish we could all lean on our electeds to, work harder to help find that balance and to help rein the agencies back in. If you're gonna do things like this, then we're gonna pass statutes that either take away that authority or make it more clear about how to exercise that authority, because what we've seen happen to the Kings, if they could do this to anyone, it's horrifying to think of what that future could look like.
What's amazing is that they just say, if we're wrong, we're going to write a check from the taxpayers. I mean, it's kind of a double whammy.
Yeah. Just a quick reminder that Secretary Rollins does have the lawfare portal. And I think it's important to note that we, I specifically asked, like, hey, you're not a state agency. Why would this lawfare portal be important to the citizens of Washington or other states? And she says it's important to everyone in agriculture. If you have an issue, and government overreach is an issue, to fill that lawfare portal out. So I think that's important. And the other thing I would say, and I do say this to a lot of ranchers, document, right? We are coming in as attorneys after the fact to try and defend people in agriculture, and our job is much easier if you can tell us, like, for instance, how much water your animal does use, or what wildlife you've seen out there, or whatever your operation looks like. But the best way to protect yourself and to protect yourself against ecology is to know what you're doing and to document what you're doing. So I also think that those are important words that we all need to live by.
I'll finish by saying on my last comment that I do think writing your elected officials, right? Writing the agencies, telling them you think this is wrong. I mean, I think that is important because, we are the regulated community, and we need to make sure the regulators know that there are certain things that are not going to work for us. So participating in rulemaking, writing emails, making phone calls to electeds, I think that's really important because that's the kind, it's going to take that kind of an effort to get some kind of response in the legislative branch. And don't forget, the Clean Water Act initially didn't have those ag exemptions, and it took the agricultural community to stand up and say, wait, what about us? How is this going to affect us? And it was through those efforts that a lot of the really important protections under the Clean Water Act that are in place came to be. So in Washington and in every other state, as they go through state waters alteration permit processes and planning and rulemaking, fight for your needs as a regulated community. And I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. You can take care of the environment. And in fact, you can do these activities in a way that enhances the environment. So let's work together and solve these problems. These are not either or.
Do you think at any point in time in all this, the DOE looked at this case and said, okay, we might have made a mistake, but we're just going to stand our ground to stand our ground? Because I mean, it seemed if they're out there trying to create this rule now, it almost seems like that's admission that well, we didn't really have the right framework in place to do what we've done. But then they continued to plug away with it, almost like as if they're just being stubborn. Well, we made a mistake, but we're going to see it through.
Yeah,
You
they
ever get
doubled
that
down.
feeling?
So, yeah, I think we do get that feeling all the time, don't we, Jamie?
I mean, part of me hopes that's true, because if they really think that this is okay under the current laws and regulations, then that to me is a bigger problem. So part of me is hoping that it really is just ego, or, wanting to double down and not admit a mistake. But, because if it's something worse than that, that's scarier in a way.
Yeah.
Well, and if they admit the mistake now, that they've already done the damage to the ranch financially, it's a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm. Right. And,
But they can just write a check. We've heard that 11 times at the one hearing.
Well,
no, I mean, yeah, look, we all make mistakes. I think, it's a mark of integrity if you can admit that you made a mistake and work with someone to find a solution, right? And so I remain optimistic. I mean, Tony and I are going to do whatever we can with the tools that we have as lawyers in the courts to, see that our clients are protected, and they'll never be made whole, but we'll do our best to make sure that they get close. And, in the meantime, I really do hope that the agencies and the state legislators will realize this is a problem and that it's something we can solve with some, thought and effort.
and hopefully, too, more people, when they get these notices in the mail and stuff, don't just give up and they call somebody for help. I mean, there's all sorts of ways of getting funding to fight something these days, but if people are just willing to lie down, then the agencies are going to continue to do this type of stuff and get away with it.
As a prime example, I would just say this. We've seen a lot of these letters from Department of Ecology come out, and a couple of people have called me and I've said, get your public records request in, figure out what your file is. A couple of them have called me back and said, that's not even our ranch. That's not even our operation. But they're going after us anyway. So, a lot of what I tell people is don't bury your head in the sand. When you get the first letter, there are a lot of free resources you can use, like your conservation district, your NRCS people. There are free resources for those that don't have a lot of money. But the thing that you're going to lose, the thing that there's no value to because there's nothing you can do to replace it, is your land. It's your ranch. So you have to do something. Doing nothing causes you to lose everything. Doing something, even if it's just what you can afford, potentially saves your ranch, saves your operation for the next generation, because that's what we're all doing it for.
So how many of these cases do you guys see on a regular basis?
I see a lot. I mean, again, I'm the water and ecology chair for the Washington Cattlemen's Association, so I hear a lot about them. But a lot of what we're facing is when you start talking to people about what they can do, steps they can take, you just see it on their face. They're just exhausted. They're resigned. Being in agriculture already, I mean, it's a day-to-day existence for a lot of aspects of it. And so this is just the thing it's the straw that broke the camel's back. They just can't deal with it. So it's really hard in these cases to find a client that I call kind of the trifecta. They're young enough to deal with it, they have some amount of money and can deal with it, and they can emotionally deal with it. And the emotional piece is probably the most important piece, because I've had a client that I took his case all the way to the Washington Supreme Court. He got Parkinson's, ended up passing away. You just, this is so heavy and so hard and so detrimental to a human that you're already dealing with all these things in agriculture that are hard. And then you take this and you just, it's so much worse.
Yeah.
It's like torture. And so if you can't be that trifecta, be what you can be and advocate for yourself and find people that can help you. But it is really hard to find the client that can fight this fight, because these agencies are not going to give up. They don't have to. They have the money, they have the ability, they can fight you till the end, and you're there fighting for your life, and they're just fighting from 9 to 5.
And the Kings have held in there pretty well, but I'm sure they're pretty upset about it.
Well, and I've asked them that a couple times. I've said, how you guys, like, we do check-ins all the time. I don't think that anyone here doesn't recognize it. We're not just their attorneys, we're their friends. Like, you can't be in this position and not have a deeper relationship with your client than just a attorney-client relationship. You just can't. And so
Right.
a lot of times, we'll talk like whenever, and I'll be like, you doing okay, whatever. And they have been such a good support for each other. Like, when one's feeling down, and then they have a lot of faith in God, and I think that really helps them. And so I have just been very impressed with them and how they've been able to hold up. I think sometimes that we all would like to take just a 24-hour break from this, but that's just not going to happen. I mean, we're in
Yeah.
it till the end, and we have no choice, because if we even take any break, that's the opportunity the other side's looking for. So we have to be diligent, we have to continue, and we've got to be able to rely on each other. And we've been able to build that relationship to do that.
One more thing, and this kind of goes back to what has happened to them, but number one, when they were kicked off their land, is it true that they lost all of their infrastructure and everything that they had put into it? And also, how hard would it be for them to get back on track if all of this was cleared up?
So when you get that letter from Department of Ecology that says, we've declared you in default and you've forfeited all your personal property. So in Washington, I don't know how this is in other states, but you're the one that builds the fence. You're the one that puts in the wells. You're the one that has the solar panel for your well to work. Like, that's all yours. You own that. And that's one of the big benefits to having these DNR leases, is that you've got, a little bit of skin in the game, and you're able to do things the way that works for your operation. So yes, that is true. When that initial letter came out, that letter declared those things forfeited. And then in the PI order, that order actually said that Kings could not step foot on DNR land at all. So this has been a big hardship for them. I don't know that after a case like this, you ever get back on track all the way. You lose a lot of yourself, you lose a lot of your faith, and especially in Washington, we've talked about it. Like, Kings had a great relationship with DNR. Then they get a letter out of the blue, December 23rd, right before Christmas. I mean, how do you ever come back from that? I mean, again, talking about the emotional toll, the toll on their family, the toll on them, their toll on everybody, you never come back. You just continue to go on.
Well, hopefully they win this so that they can give other ranchers hope that are dealing with similar situations.
Yes.
But does the King Ranch in Washington have any relationship with the King Ranch in Texas? I get that question all the time. I didn't think they
That's
did.
important, bro, because I think a lot of people might think this is the Texas King Ranch. And, I think when you're out there saying, hey, funds would be helpful and these sorts of things, they're sort of like, come on, King Ranch in Texas needs our financial support. But this is Wade and Teresa King, on horseback with their daughter and sometimes one employee, grazing 37,000 acres. So it is not the King Ranch in Texas. And it's really hard because all those experts, I mean, lawyers are really expensive. Everybody knows that. But what people don't realize is that having these experts do these kinds of reports for various reasons, I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Just to have somebody come in and say, I don't know what the state is talking about. Like, again, you're out of pocket all that money and it's not insignificant, right? So these costs just really mount and pretty quickly. And this is why a lot of people can't stay in this fight is they can't do it. And so I do think it takes a community, if the Kings are going to stay in this fight and they are committed, and they're doing this for everybody, not just themselves. And that's why I really think, financially, we should all share this burden because they are doing this for all of us in Washington. And I think financial support would go a long way to keep them in the fight and get some of these cases to the right places so the right decision makers can do what's right.
And so this is one other thing I have a question on. They got the injunction to move them off the ranch pretty much without proving anything at all. And I know that you have a case against the state for what has happened to the King Ranch, but it's been since 2021. Are they ever going to try and prove their case as to what the Kings did that got them kicked off their leases, or do they not even have to prove that at this point?
So I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. So we are now in a position that we can challenge that preliminary injunction, that PI. So we aren't waiting for them to bring the fight to us. We're bringing the fight to them. And we're really anticipating this coming out very soon. We'll share that with you when we can. I don't want to get into the weeds about it, but we're not going to sit here and wait. We're not going to be victims. We were postponed from pursuing it because of the criminal piece. But we're hoping that that scare tactic is over, and we are wanting to pursue this. And so do Kings, right? Like anybody, they want to pound the table and say we did nothing wrong. And we're going to be able to do that, and we're going to be able to show the state and again the world that nothing wrong happened here, that they have absolutely been targeted based on whatever. We don't know why. We can only speculate, but we're bringing the fight to them.
It will be the first time here very shortly that the Kings are getting to tell their story because they've never been able to do that before. And even though the attorneys general refuse to give us something in writing that they will not prosecute the Kings criminally, they have been advised, again, not to the most comforting of levels, that the statute of limitations has probably run at this point. But I think they feel like they are at a point where they're willing to take what little risk may be left to finally start educating a judge about what's really going on. So we're about to have a pretty big filing here, this week, and I think we will share it with you for sure because it is one of the first times you'll get to read. Oh, really? All this has happened. It fills in a lot of the holes for sure.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how it turns out because to me, it's mind-boggling that they could throw them off of the land without having to prove a case. But I feel
it gets worse though. It's like because of that checkerboard pattern I told you about, it's not just the lease land. They've literally been ordered by a court that they cannot go onto their fee-owned land that's in between. Can you imagine that? Like you have your property that you own sitting in the middle of a DNR lease that you used for over 70 years in your family. And this court comes in and says, not only can you not graze cattle, which have been happening for hundreds of years, but you can't even go to your own fee-owned land. Every member of this land is open to the public. The public can go on it. They can ATV, they can shoot guns, they can do whatever they want. Wade and Teresa King cannot put a foot on that property. It's mind-boggling.
That is crazy.
So hopefully we'll get that changed here soon. But and that's the risk of fighting. When you're fighting the state, you're always at a disadvantage. And I think judges are more comfortable siding with the state in most cases because there's inherent sort of trust there. I think this goes to Tony's point earlier. It's pretty easy to get put in a box when you're fighting the state that obviously you must have done something wrong, right? Why would they come after you? And so
Yeah.
I think part of this is educating the judges that, hey, sometimes it's not that, right? Sometimes these are just people going on living a good, honest life, and something else is motivating it.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, we can only speculate to the motivation, but it's been clear that there's something we're not seeing, because why else would they have pursued it to this level? I mean, again, multiple times we've asked and asked and asked. Just come to the table. And in fact, I said that from the beginning when Wade and Teresa got that letter on December 23rd. I laughed. I said, oh, this is a mistake. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. Get through Christmas. Let's, in my mind, there was no way that anybody could take this seriously. And here we are in 2025, still going strong. It's mind boggling. And a common sense approach simply doesn't work on this case. Yeah.
I feel like there have been some Supreme Court rulings that actually would help sway a court away from just depending on what the agency says. They I guess they still tend to look at the agencies as experts. But
which is why we hired experts, right? Like that was the whole reason that, as Jamie has said, we put that cost in and said to Kings this is necessary, so that wouldn't be just Kings versus a state agency. We would have truly the top experts in the entire nation coming in and saying the state agency is running amok. We don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah. And they've had to pay for all that out of pocket, huh?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people do question us, like, why does this cost them so much? Well, experts of this caliber, I mean, and you want to get the best, because when they eventually are going to have to be on the stand, you want them to be as bulletproof as you can possibly be, and you don't want somebody that doesn't know their job. So you do spend the money, you get the top of the top, and that's going to allow everyone to benefit. But those experts are extremely expensive. The testing, everything is extremely expensive.
Because to me, it seems like even with, just with septics on our house, we got denied when we were building our farm, and I brought in a soil scientist, and the amount of information he was able to put out there totally trumped anything that that local agency had any knowledge of. But again, somebody sitting behind a desk looking at a Google aerial can somehow make those determinations and try and destroy an entire ranch. It's a little uncomfortable,
Yeah,
so
for sure. Well, and I don't know if I said this, but he, when we got that email that he's like, hey, I've been, he said, I am not rusty when it comes to wetland delineation. I am full of rust. That's what he said about himself. And yet he still pursued this after making that statement, like, I am not rusty. I am full of rust when it comes to wetland delineation. But I am also recommending that this be pursued and go to the AG. Like, that's the same guy. Like, how do you put faith in a government agency that allows that to be pursued to the level that we're at today? That's insane.
Well, and then remember, they did at one point they had done a deeper dive into the aerial photography to figure out the timing of the alleged maintenance of the stock water ponds, because I think they were taking the position that if the Kings were put on notice but continued to dig after they got notice, then it would create a basis for a felony malicious mischief charge.
Yes.
And they sent us a report from a quote unquote expert who, I don't know what the relationship was with the agency, but I think she was a professor or assistant professor at one of the universities. And what was interesting was that that report, and I don't know if it was her specifically, but that report got the timing, like it mixed up some of the sites and the timing. And so then we had to hire an aerial photogrammetrist, right, to do the same analysis that they tried to do, who came back and said, I have no idea what that report is saying. When I do my analysis, there is no evidence that these bonds were ever manipulated after the Kings got notice. that they shouldn't be doing this for the first time. And so, again, it was just sort of mind-boggling. And I think we ended up filing that report. That was in the criminal proceeding, I
Yeah,
think, Tony. And
it was. Yep.
and I don't think they ever rebutted it, or if they did, we don't know because we didn't get to see it. So,
Yep.
it's things like that where they say one thing, we spend a ton of money on experts to prove them wrong, and then we never hear back.
Yeah, they just
And
pivot to something else. They go to the next
right,
thing.
it's
Yeah.
like whack-a-mole.
Yeah. Well, and
Do
the
you
other part
think?
that oh, sorry, Charlie, go ahead. I was just going to say, the only other thing I want to add to that, though, is when we got that letter in December, the first initial letter, in December, they said in that letter that these activities had taken place in February. And they spent that whole time doing nothing. Like, they're like, oh, it's so detrimental. You're ruining these lands. But they waited from February to December to send the letter. How does that even make sense?
Yeah. Do you think that the hiker rumor theory? I don't know where it was in some news articles. I don't really know where they got that information. Do you think that was just something that was plugged out there as if there's some other, evidence that nobody knows about, so that they can't just say, oh, well, we're really just going off of aerials?
It could be that person's the one that had a relationship with Department of Ecology and tipped them off. I think that would be our thought process on that. But we really don't know. We've never seen like what that tip looked like, who that person is. We've never been given the chance to even know that person's name.
Yeah, I
Because
don't know all the details around it. I do think in the public records, I will say I have seen at least agency emails that suggested somebody was out there hiking and initially made a phone call to, I want to say it was Fish and Wildlife Service, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
And then that pretty quickly got back to the state. And that's what then maybe precipitated the aerial photograph examination.
yeah,
Again, I don't know. We have to kind of read between the lines because of the public records responses, which, by the way, have been going on for 4 years. We still don't have all the documents that we've requested. So, that's another thing for landowners to be put in this position of being told that you're violating state law. And then when you ask them to, okay, can you send me your evidence so I can see what it is you're basing this allegation on? And they say, no, submit a public records request, and then not only you have to pay for the responses, but they can delay the responses in installments that span years and years. And, maybe the most significant communications will show up in 3 years from now.
Well, and they bombard
yeah.
us with answers. Like they'll send you the same email 5, 6 times. It's hard to search through. I mean, they just bombard you. And like to Jamie's point, they charge you for it as well. So we've got a couple $1,000s just in trying to get records of what allegedly happened that in any other case they would be forced to give you because you could see the file. It's
Yeah.
again, it's every position that they could take to stymie our ability to defend our client has been taken.
And you can't subpoena that information through court, or
We
is just
requested in the criminal investigation, we requested, please just let us have the file, let us have something. And we were told, no, you are not getting that.
because it's
Yeah,
empty?
certain aspects of the case we will never get. To your point, I think we are finally at a point where we can start issuing subpoenas and requesting records and other processes, which have not been available for a variety of reasons, including, we had asked for stays. We're also having here's the other problem with lawsuits, you probably know, is that, just to go have the fight about the actual issue, we have to have 4 other fights first, right? Including, we have this one case against DNR in Douglas County where we had alleged a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. And they brought a motion to move that whole case to Thurston County, which is on the other side of the state, because there is an argument that that kind of a claim should be brought over there. We think our argument is stronger that it should be in Douglas County. And so now we're at the Court of Appeals trying to figure out which court do we even go to start fighting about the actual fight on this particular issue. And so, I share that just as, these things just, you end up spending all this money to litigate these issues that are sideshows, right? And they have to be resolved, but it's time consuming and expensive for the kings to go litigate about this issue on venue for years, just to maybe come back to the court we filed in so we can go to the merits. It's really, unfortunate. And I think the state knows that this is expensive for the kings. And if they can't stay in the fight financially, at some point they'll have to give up. That's what the state, I think, is hoping for at this point.
I hope you guys felt the weight of what we just heard. The King Ranch isn't just another court battle. It's a test to see if family ranches, family farmers still have a stake at the table when it comes to making the decisions that govern our lands, the decisions that govern our water, and our general way of life. You just listened to two attorneys lay out the facts. The archaeology does not support the shutdown. Decades of ranch history and working with the DNR does not support the shutdown. The terms of their lease agreement with the state do not support the shutdown. And guys, basic common sense surely does not support the shutdown. Yet here we are with a ranching family fighting to continue stewardship that predates the agencies that are attacking them themselves. This is what the kings are actually fighting for. Not power, not politics, just the right to run cattle, maintain water, and feed their community, just the same way as their fathers did and their grandfathers did. They're not fighting quietly. They're certainly not fighting selfishly. They're fighting for precedent. They're fighting for clarity. They're fighting for every rancher, for every small family farm to not wake up one day and find out that the rules have changed from underneath their boots without them even knowing about it. Let me put this plainly to you. If the kings lose, every rancher and every farmer loses. If the kings win, every rancher and every farmer wins. This case reaches well beyond Grant County. It impacts agricultural leases in every single state where agencies manage land, which is a lot of the West. It affects the future of multi-generational families who have continuously been stewards of our land, who have fed our entire nation, sacrificed for our entire nation. And right now, the kings and all of them need your help more than ever. And I'm not just talking about moral support, although that really does matter in this case. I'm not just talking about sharing their story, although we should all be sharing their story. We should be talking about this because they need visibility. They need attention. They need the public to be aware of their story because what is happening to them shouldn't ever happen to an American citizen, any of them. If this interview moved you, if it made you ask more questions, that made you want to know more about the bigger picture, take a moment today to stand with the kings. Share their story, talk about it, show up, write to your legislators, donate if you can. Let the agencies that are making these decisions know that rural America is paying attention and will stand together. Because ranching isn't an industry. It's a relationship between people, between land, water, and wildlife. And when that relationship is threatened by government overreach, it doesn't just impact one rancher, it impacts every single one of us. The next big hearing on this is December 16th, and we will keep you posted on what happens with this case from there. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting the Kings. And thank you for standing up for every family who works the land, who protects the land, and who feeds this country.
Ancient eras and natural selection have refined and tailored pristine fibers with the resilience for today's days. Evolving beyond the last ice age, bison wool is nature's most dependable activewear. Buffalo Wool Company, 100% proven by nature, 100% American made.
Check out the Buffalo Wool Company collection at yanasatradingco.com.